I am the creator of Blitz.js, and I'm here to tell you the exciting story about why I started Blitz, why it's awesome, and why you might want to choose it for your next full stack project. So let's get started. For most of the past 4 years, I was like this guy, happily building full stack React apps, and I was fully content to put up with the complexity and struggle required to do so. And I did that because I loved building user interfaces with React more than any other way. But the honeymoon ended. And I became increasingly frustrated with everything it took just to get things configured and set up before I could even start building features. I grew weary of the API layer, of dealing with REST and GraphQL and all of that sort of stuff. Anything that got in the way of me building features slowly depleted my morale. I really wanted to love full stack web development again. I wanted to be extremely productive again. I wanted to focus on building features instead of all the boring stuff that made me want to quit work early. So finally I decided enough was enough. And I set out to build the best possible developer experience for building full stack React apps. Now, there were two things that I had to have to achieve the vision that I was going for, the developer experience that I wanted. Number one, I wanted a monolithic developer experience. So monolithic means there's conceptually one thing to think about when you are building your app and when you're deploying it. So everything is sort of, self-contained versus having a bunch of microservices that you're having to orchestrate together. Almost every single app should be started as a monolithic app, in my opinion, and that it can scale with you for a long time before you need to break things out into microservices. And then secondly is I wanted to get rid of the API, because the API layer in React apps is one of the biggest sources of complexity and confusion, headache, heartache, and stuff like that. So I wanted to get rid of it. Now, that begs the question, how can you get rid of the API layer in React apps? Well, I got into web programming through Ruby on Rails. And there's no API layer there because it's all server-side rendering. And when I first announced Blitz at the beginning of last year, before COVID, the initial prototype I had was server-side rendered because that's the only way I knew to get rid of that API layer. But I was like, well, this is worth it, and people got excited about it nonetheless. But I didn't love it. And so me and the other early Blitz contributors were discussing amongst ourselves, what would the architecture look like? Like, we have a clean slate. Should we use MVC? Should we use, what should we use? What should the architecture look like? And one day I was laying in a hammock in Thailand, pondering this. And I asked myself, what would this look like if it was easy? And suddenly I had this picture flood my imagination, and I could see myself writing a function that runs on the server. And inside that function, I would talk to a database or do whatever I needed to do. And then I would import that function directly into my front-end components and call it like a direct function call, and it would just work automatically over the network. And I was like, wow, now that is super cool. Can we make it work? And it turns out we made it work, and it is the flagship feature of Blitz.js and why people tell us that it literally makes them 5 to 10 times more productive than other stacks. All right, so let's talk about some of the basics about what Blitz is and help you understand what it actually looks like. So most of you have probably heard of Next.js, and Next.js is really cool because it's a hybrid framework. And so you can do server-side rendering, client-side rendering, or static page generation like Gatsby on a page-by-page basis. So you can choose what you want to do, and it's really flexible. And then beyond that, you can also have API routes. So it's a really good, you can build a full full stack app just with Next.js. But if you've ever done that, you know you have to make a lot of decisions and do a lot of work to get it working for a full stack context. You have to bring your own authentication, your own database, your own everything, because Next.js is very minimal. What it does is does very well, but it's very kind of tightly scoped. So we decided that Next.js would be the best foundation to build the next Ruby on Rails equivalent for JavaScript. So Blitz is a fork of Next.js that adds power features for building full stack apps. Now I want to emphasize that we keep up to date with Next.js. We merge in every new release. And for the foreseeable future, as long as Blitz users want us to, we will maintain full compatibility with Next.js. So essentially, you get everything you get with Next.js, plus a bunch of awesome stuff that I'll show you shortly. The second assorted big thing that you have in a full stack app is your database and reading and writing from your database, right? So that needs to be really easy to use if you want to optimize the developer experience. Well, thankfully, Prisma came out. It was in beta when I first announced Blitz, and it was one of the reasons that kind of motivated me to be like, yeah, I think I can make something out of this. Prisma is a next generation ORM for Node and TypeScript. Prisma is really awesome, and there's a reason that almost everyone doing some type of full stack framework like Blitz is choosing Prisma. Like Prisma is the real winner here. So even if you never use Blitz, you should probably use Prisma. Prisma handles everything you need on the database side. So it handles migrations and a database client. So what you see here is your Prisma schema, and it allows you to define your database tables, fields, and the field types and relationships and in a GraphQL-like syntax. So it's very easy to learn, very easy to read and write. And then you run Prisma migrate, and it'll automatically generate the SQL migrations for you and migrate your local database and then also your production database whenever you deploy. Secondly, is Prisma gives you a fully typed database client that's really easy to use, so you don't have to write SQL queries. Like you can see, it's a very JavaScript-y API, really simple, but it's fully typed based on your database schema. So if you're using TypeScript, then you get type checking for all your database read and writes. And you get autocomplete, all of that stuff. So it's very, 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 very cool. All right, let's talk about some of the foundational principles. It's sort of the framework that we've used to make the decisions that we have in building Blitz. Full stack and monolithic. API not required. So not required means that we abstract it away for you by default. I'll show you that. But you can also add your own GraphQL API easily to Blitz as well if you want to. Convention over configuration means that things just work by default without you having to configure things. But you can configure. So the opposite of this would be configuration over convention. Anyone know anything like that? Webpack. Number 4, loose opinions. So we have a lot of opinions and recommendations for how to do things in Blitz, but there is very, very little that we actually enforce. So for example, in Ruby on Rails, it's very difficult to go off the rails. But in Blitz, we're very flexible, and we let you blaze your own path as much as you want. So we want it to be really easy to use to get started for simple side projects, school projects, etc. But we also want it to be really great for your next multi-billion-dollar startup. In stability, once we get to 1.0, we'll have some type of stable, predictable release cycle based on what the community wants, but Ember is kind of a key inspiration for how they do their releases. And last but not least is community over code. ever since day one, I've been very intentional about building a really awesome community of people that are friendly, that's inclusive, and just have fun together. And we've had almost zero issues in the community. So we really care about community, and we'd love to have you join it as well. All right, so what does Blitz look like when you start using it? Well, one of the first things you'll notice is that all the boring stuff is done for you out of the box. So we give you a default folder structure, linting is set up, code formatting, Git hooks, testing, your database, and forms is all set up for you. And for a number of those, we let you choose whenever you generate a new app to choose like one of the most popular libraries. So it's quite flexible. Now the big one is user sign up. Log in and log out is already set up for you out of the box. So you never have to do authentication ever again if you use Blitz.js. And also reset password. So it's super cool. It's one of my favorite things. And I'll show you a demo before long. All right, so remember how I was laying in the hammock in Thailand, and I had that picture of me writing a function that runs on the server, importing it into the front end, and it just magically worked? That's what we call the zero API data layer. And just like serverless still has servers, zero API still has an API. So what we do is we abstract the API into a compile step. And it allows you to have that dynamic, loading, reading and writing data from the client, but without using REST or GraphQL. And we actually generate an RPC API for each of your queries and mutations. So in a Blitz app, you'll see a queries folder and a mutations folder. Those are magic folders, very similar to the pages folder, a very similar type experience. And those are automatically turned into each one of them an RPC endpoint that you can actually call directly from a script or a third-party app if you want to. All right, let's look at some code. So here we are in the terminal, and I have generated a brand new app by running the Blitz CLI, Blitz new, and it asked me a number of questions, whether I want TypeScript, highly recommended, or JavaScript. You can do the full app template, or if you don't want a database or authentication, if you want to bring your own something, then we have an option to have a minimal generation. Pick your package manager, and then also pick your form library. So there's quite a lot of files that are generated here. Now, try not to be overwhelmed about this. So what we're optimizing here for is not a, wow, this is so simple. There's only 2 files. Like, it's so easy. But then as soon as you go to actually do something real, you have to go look at the docs, copy and paste files, and all this stuff. So we generate everything that you need to build a real application out of the box. So take your time to go through it, get familiar with it. And the benefit is that this is exactly the same every single time. So almost every Blitz app that you will create or that you'll come across will use a lot of this default code, and so it's very familiar, and that's a real benefit for being able to move between apps. And a lot of that is authentication related. Then we install the dependencies for you. We automatically set up a SQLite database for you locally. We recommend you switch to something more like Postgres for production, but we give you SQLite by default since it comes on everyone's computers, and we don't have to teach you about Postgres when you're just getting started. All right, so let's start the dev server, Blitz dev. And you'll see that this is very familiar if you've used Next.js, a lot of the same type of logging. All right, so simple getting started page, but the kind of the big thing here is there's a sign up and a login button. So let's sign up. And boom, we're logged in, and we have a user ID of 1 and a user role of user. We could log out, we could reset our password, etc. And so our task for the first 2 weeks is already done. All right, so let's let's pretend we're gonna like actually build some stuff. So now you can run Blitz generate, and you can specify the type of files that you want to generate. In this case, we want to say all. We want to generate all the files. And we're just going to call the model project. And we're going to add a name attribute that's a string. So this is very similar to Ruby on Rails generate command. It's heavily inspired by that. It lets you add as many attributes as you want. And we're going to hit enter. And this generates all the files you need for all the basic operations. So create, read, update, delete, your CRUD operations. End to end, everything works. And it also adds the, it adds all the pages for that, and then also the queries and mutations. And then it adds the model to your database. And we're going to hit yes to Prisma migrate. All right, now we can start the server again. Refresh. And we're going to go to /projects. And now we can see a list of projects here. But notice the list is empty because we haven't created anything yet. So we can click create project, and that takes us to /project/new. So we care about the URLs. Create a project. And boom, there we are. Now we're on /project/1, and we're loading the data on the client. You can see it all right there. And you can edit. And notice this is using the same form. That was the new. So we have that all nicely set up for you. We can update that. We can delete it, go back to the list of projects, and there you have it. So now it's ready for you to just go ahead and add your own styling, your own functionality or whatever, but we've done like all the basic stuff for you, and now you can really add your the things that are like extra for your app, the things that are really impactful. All right, so let's look at the code to see what this looks like. So we'll look at the get project query. Okay, so the API here is, or the API construct, I guess, or the signature, is exporting a default async function that takes in input argument as the first argument and some context as the second one, and then returns some result. Okay, so that's a very simple input output. But what we generate here for you has some extra stuff, and it's a functional pipe. So it just pipes the output of one function into the next, and so you can chain as many as you want together. And the reason we have this by default is it greatly simplifies some of the TypeScript types. And so it really makes your life a lot better. And you can see the first thing we have in the pipe is resolver.zod. Zod is an input validation library, like yup, if you're familiar with that, but Zod is better for TypeScript, and just all around, I like it better. And so we have it in there by default. People quite like it. And this allows you to pass in a schema that is going to require that your input data matches some format, whether it's a date or email or et cetera. And this is important because this is going to be an endpoint open to the internet. And so you need to make sure that the data coming in is actually valid. And so this is an easy way to do that. Otherwise, it will throw an error. Secondly, authentication and authorization is very important. So we have that also by default. This line will ensure that that the user is logged in. Otherwise, it will throw an error. All right, that's awesome. But what if we wanted to say only an admin could access this data? Well, that's easy. Just put in the role admin there, and now it's going to throw an authorization error if the user doesn't have that role. So this is all out of the box by default. All right, now that the data is correct and the user is verified, now we can actually do the core business logic that we want, which is, in this case, accessing the database. This DB object comes from Prisma. So we can call db.project.findFirst, and we're just going to look for the project with the ID, return that. If it doesn't exist, we're going to throw a not found error. And I'll show you how we handle errors a little bit later, but it's a really, really cool thing. And then we just return that project. Okay, so very simple. And there's no HTTP, no request response. It's just a very simple JavaScript. All right, so how do we use this? Okay, so here is the project ID page. And here we are importing that function we just looked at. Okay, so it's just a plain function. We're importing it here. And we pass it to the useQuery hook, which comes from Blitz. Pass in the query function, get project, and then the parameters, which is the project ID that's coming from the URL. And then that simply returns the project, and then we can render it, you know, like normal React project, project.id, etc. And that's it. No REST, no GraphQL. It just magically works. All right, so let's look at a mutation. So you can see here we have this delete project mutation. And so here we have like this delete button. And on the onClick, we call the await delete project mutation. And we just pass in the ID. Okay, so let's go back and look. So this is a use mutation hook, which uses delete project. Let's go look at this function. All right, so exact same thing. You have, at the top, you have this Zod schema where you require an ID of a number. And inside the pipe, we're gonna first ensure that thing is present. We're gonna ensure that the user is logged in. And then we call Prisma and say db.project.delete. And the project is gone. Okay, so it's very easy to read or write data just by using these functions. All right, so something that's really cool because of this model is you get TypeScript types statically all the way from your database to your front end. Versus if you're using GraphQL, you have to have a separate code generation process that's you know, recompiling your types all the time. So for example, if you just look here at project dot has ID, name, created that, updated that. And that's coming from the database because of Prisma. So that's really cool. So if you change your database model, if you remove a field, then and you're using it here in your component, you're going to get a TypeScript error. All right, now the other thing that you'll notice is that project.createdThat is a date. So if you've ever used an API, you'll know that you have to convert a date to a string to send it over the wire, right? And then on the front end, if you want to change that date, you have to convert it back to a date and then change it. Well, we handle all that for you. We created a library called SuperJSON that automatically serializes and deserializes dates, maps, sets, regex, like basically everything. Even custom classes and error objects, we handle it automatically for you. And that you can actually use that library yourself in any project. And we have a Babel plugin that allows you to add it to a Next.js app for your get server-side props and get static props. So if you've used those, you've probably had that, you know, can't serialize a date error. Well, use SuperJSON or Blitz, and you'll never have to worry about that again. Okay, so what is missing from this? How about a loading state and the error handling? Well, surprise, surprise, since we started last year, Blitz was in alpha, and we were like, well, we might as well use React Experimental and go for use suspense. So we've been using suspense from day one in Blitz, and people love it. There's been like basically zero problems. And so it's really cool because you don't have to have that if loading, else if error dance, right? So you use suspense component for loading and then error boundary for your errors. So if we go down to the bottom, the core page here has a suspense fallback, and then that's where we have that loading indicator. And then the error boundary, there's no error boundary here, but what we set up by default in the root of your application _app. Here we have a default error boundary. And this will catch all the errors in your app. You can add more error boundaries if you want to have it more granular by component or page. And then inside this is where you handle your error. Now, let's go back to get project. So this authorize function is going to throw, if you're not logged in, it's going to throw an authentication error, okay? And same thing here is not found error. So how do you catch errors on the server if you throw them? You catch them, right, with a try catch. How do you handle errors on the front end if you throw them on the server? Your API layer probably has to like handle that, right? And then on the client, you're like looking for some error response. Well, in Blitz, if you throw an error on the server, you can catch it on the client with an error boundary. And so we extend that try-catch model basically to the whole stack. So it's super, super cool. So here, if you throw an authentication error, you can literally catch it in your error boundary and render a login form or show a not authorized, or in the case of the not found error, it's going to have an error.statuscode 404 here. So that's another thing that's enabled by SuperJSON, and then our Zero API data layer. All right, one more thing before I get back to the slides. There's a really cool thing that comes from Prisma called Prisma Studio. And it looks like this. This is your database, all the tables in your database. And you can come in and inspect those, see all the fields. You can edit the fields. And so it's a really nice visual way to see your database. So this is just Prisma. If you can use Prisma in any project, very cool. And you can also hook this up to your production database, for example, and have a really nice simple UI for your production database. All right, let's go back to slides, and I'll touch on a few more features. This right here is one of the really the coolest features of Blitz. So in a normal Next.js app, you are going to be hard coding your string. So your href equals string / home / projects / whatever, right? What happens if you move that page? You may have some broken link somewhere and you don't really know it, right? Unless you have good test coverage or something. Well, in Blitz, we generate this routes object for you automatically that you can import and use. And this routes object has all your pages in the entire application, and it allows you to easily pass in route parameters, as you can see here on the second one, or query parameters, etc. It's very easy, so you don't have to worry about broken links, and it's also typed via TypeScript. And so this decouples the name of the page from the URL of the page. So you can take a page, like the home page or something, and move it to a different URL, like from home to dashboard, and all of your links will just update automatically because Blitz will detect that and update this object. And this is something that doesn't exist in Next.js, at least yet. I'm more than happy to contribute it upstream if you all can convince the Next.js team to accept it. All right, how many of you just really enjoy the painful task of integrating third-party libraries, installing config files, theme providers, dependencies, all that? Not even a single person. All right. Well, good news. If you're using Blitz, you don't have to worry about that almost ever again. So we have a thing called Blitz recipes that allows you to install basically arbitrary code or third-party packages with one command. So for example, you can run blitz install chakra UI, and we will automatically install all the required dependencies, install the config files, and will automatically go in and update your root of your application to add a theme provider. All with just one command. And so it's really nice. We have a lot of recipes, but not all of them. We have a lot of the basics covered, but anyone can contribute new recipes, make your own custom recipe, and we're working on making that even easier to write recipes. If you have ever used Ruby on Rails, then you know about the Rails console. And so we wanted to bring that. That's something that a lot of us that have used Rails have missed in the JavaScript ecosystem. So we have brought that to Blitz with Blitz console. Essentially, it's just a super powered REPL that lets you, that automatically loads your application code. So it's easy to do a little prototyping, run commands, functions, run one-off database commands, either locally or against production. And so this is a pretty slick. Okay, a few other features to note is it's very easy to add social login via Facebook, Twitter, etc., using our Passport.js adapter. So you drop that on an API route, drop in the Passport adapter, and it'll integrate with the Blitz session management. We have HTTP middleware that you can run against your queries and mutations. That's how we implement our authentication. The serialization I talked about, super JSON. And you can deploy to a server or serverless. This comes from Next.js, and this is important to me because it decouples, it doesn't lock you into a certain infrastructure architecture from your framework, right? So you can deploy either way. We have really great custom server support, first class, sort of unlike Next.js. You can use TypeScript, hot reloading, all of that. And then we're database agnostic. So we have Prisma in there by default, but you can easily take that out or opt out when you're generating an app and bring Fauna or DynamoDB or nothing or whatever you want to do. So Prisma supports right now Postgres, MySQL, SQLite, I think SQL Server, MongoDB. I think that's it. But they're looking to keep adding more and more. They're going to add DynamoDB support, I think, at some point. So their sort of goal is like a similar API for any database. So definitely check them out. I wish they were paying me, but they're not. All right, so where are we? We are late beta, nearing release candidate stage for Blitz. We're expecting 1.0 by end of the year, or at least a release candidate. And we're now to 10,000 GitHub stars after only a year and a half of existence and over 2,300 members in our Discord. And thousands of companies all around the world are using us in production, even pre-1.0. So that's very cool. Companies like Agolia and GraphCMS are using Blitz. A lot of startups are choosing Blitz for the iteration speed because they can just build features so fast without REST or GraphQL slowing them down. People who like Rails or Laravel, but want to use JavaScript. And then, of course, students and side projects. So basically, anyone. This fellow said that he was using Rails professionally for over a decade, and after just a few months with Blitz, he said he was already 10 times more productive with Blitz than he ever was with Ruby on Rails. It's sort of wild, but that's like the sort of thing we kind of hear over and over. You can see more of what people are saying about Blitz after using it. Go to blitzjs.com/fame, and it takes you to my Twitter thread, which is the Blitz Wall of Fame. All right, so now it's your turn to try Blitz. And you can try Blitz by installing the Blitz CLI globally and then run blitz new myapp. And you'll be off to the races. You'll be able to instantly sign up as a user, log into your app, and start scaffolding code with Blitz Generate, and your MVP can be shipped this afternoon. All right, Blitz is an open source project, so we need your help. And we would love you to be involved as much or as little as you want. You could become, we have a couple levels of maintainers. If you're interested in being more involved in something longer term, we'd love to have you join as a maintainer, or even just drive-by pull requests, contributions are helpful as well. Company sponsorships are also great. And that link at the bottom tells you, kind of goes over like how we work and how to get started contributing. All right, now one last thing before I end is I want to tell you about my latest project, flight control. I'm very excited about this. It is like Heroku. If you've heard of Heroku, it's like Heroku, but it runs inside your own AWS account. So the big thing that this solves is it removes the trade-off of being easy to use or having full control and scalability of AWS directly. So initially, we're highly optimizing for Next.js and Blitz, full stack applications using container-based hosting. But then we'll also be adding serverless hosting, like Vercel, for example, all on your own cloud. And then eventually, we're going to be expanding to other languages, other frameworks, and become an internal developer platform for large companies. I have a co-founder that's working with me on this, and then we also have an employee who is the lead Blitz maintainer now, and she's awesome. Okay, our time here together is coming to a close, sadly. But you can continue your love for Blitz by going to blitzjs.com. That's the place to learn all the documentation. There's more videos there. There's basically everything you need, blitzjs.com. If you want to keep up with us on Twitter, there's the handles. And if you want free stickers, if you're watching this later online, go to blitzjs.com/stickers, enter your mailing address, and we'll send you free stickers anywhere in the world. But if you're lucky enough to be here in person, there are Blitz stickers out there on the table, the registration desk, and I saw that the full stack for the rest of us stickers were out, but I replenished them this afternoon. So make sure you get them before they run out again if you want them full stack for the rest of us stickers. So I think that's all. Thank you very much. So we have some time for questions.
What do you think about like scaling up, like as a company goes bigger and more features into it? Like obviously the routing is going to be really complicated, and like the database is going to be complicated. Like what do you think of that?
So he's asking about scaling to large apps, large complex apps, right? So anytime you build any type of large complex apps, you're going to have challenges. I think Blitz is not going to add any challenges to you. It's going to be similar to anything else. One benefit is that you can deploy serverless. You know, if that is a thing, you can, it's basically going to scale as well as anything else you do. And at some point, you're going to have to peel off like certain things into microservices. But Blitz will take you a very long ways. Like there's some, I know some startups that are, so there is MrGamble.com is a medium to large player in the online casino space. And they're using Blitz for their entire application. Like it's a ton of traffic. It was pretty decent size. They converted from Next.js and Sanity over to Blitz because they were having performance issues with Sanity. And so they're very happy with Blitz. And that's it's sort of a web app, right? But it's more user facing. So we're seeing a lot of good feedback from people actually using it in production.
Is this all rendered on server side, or is it compile it so it looks like it's on server side, but actually doing it?
He's asking if it's all rendered server side or if it just looks like it. It's not, by default, it's all client side rendered. So it's loading a static loading page, and then it's loading fetching the data over the network. So that's a default by using the use query hook, which I forgot to mention, we built on top of React Query. So that's what powers our client-side data caching, cache invalidation, et cetera, is all powered by React Query. So we're big fans of Tanner and all his libraries.
So typically in a large enough app, you start needing to offload some things into background tasks. What's the take here? What's the path here?
So how do you do background jobs in Blitz? However you want to. So we currently have 0 recommendations or like utilities or anything for background jobs. So you do it like you do any normal node background jobs. Right now we're very minimal on background architecture. It's just sort of like whatever you want to do. We want to add more recommendations and things, as we go. But right now we're just working on fixing bugs, getting close to 1.0. And then next year we're going to be focusing more on integrations with mobile apps. So right now there are people using mobile apps with Blitz, and they're using the auto-generated API endpoints directly in their mobile app. So it's a bit of a blaze your own trail with that right now. We don't really help you, but we want to make that easier. And then we also want to bring the zero API kind of magic to React Native. So you can have a monorepo, like last talk, with your app, your web app, your Blitz app, and your React Native app, and you import your Blitz queries and mutations directly into your React Native app, and then it would just work the same way as it does in Blitz.
You said the routes object, you can change your URLs, but the names of the objects stay the same. Where does Blitz get those names from?
It's the name of the component that you export as the default component. So whatever that name is what the name on the routes object will be.
Where's the boundary between the server-side rendering and the client-side rendering?
Where's the boundary between server-side rendering and client-side rendering? Have you used Next.js before? Okay, so with Next.js, all your pages, like if it's just a simple page, same thing with Blitz by default, is rendered once at build time with the loading state. So that's a server-side thing at loading or at build time, just the loading state. And then from then on, by default, everything is client-side rendered. So rendering the loading page at build time allows it to be statically cached, so that loads super fast while you wait for data from the network. If you want to use server-side rendering dynamically on each request, then you'll export a get server-side props function from that page, and inside that you can use a Blitz query or mutation or whatever, probably not mutation, query, or fetch some API, and then that would be a server-side render page every time. Yes, you have full control over whatever you want to do. Yep.
So since you access the same models, both server-side code and client-side code, can you control what maybe fields on the model should not be sent down to the client? So
since it's like models are shared client and server, can you choose what fields are not sent to the client? Yes, so you can just, whatever you return from the query is what gets to the front end. So if you don't want to return something from there, just don't include it. So Prisma, there's an open issue that you should all go like pile on for adding a private field in your Prisma schema that would not return that by default whenever you query a model. So like that would be ideal for password, hash password and stuff. You just mark that as private, and then Prisma would never return that from any query unless you specifically requested that field. But you can use select to only select certain fields with Prisma. So Blitz doesn't really help you that much. It's sort of, we set some things up by default that are best practice for the authentication stuff. But it's sort of on you to some extent until Prisma implements that feature. Yes?
So Prisma includes migrations, right? Direct migrations.
Yes.
To integrate, of course, work with that, you still go through like the Prisma CLI, or does Blitz expose something through its CLI to do migration?
So you basically use the Prisma CLI, but there's a problem that Prisma only supports a single .env file, and Blitz supports .env.production, .env. Whatever you want. And so we wrap the Prisma CLI so that you can call Blitz Prisma migrate, Blitz Prisma db push, etc. So you just put Blitz in front of it, and then we'll load the environment variables properly for you. Yep.
Adding on to his question, if I need to do some database operations, right, and I want to do some conversion, for example, and I do not want the user to see that, is that possible? Can I push the configuration into the service.
As in pushing data to the database?
No, but as for example, if I need to load some data, right? But part of data I need the user to see.
So like on the server, you need to calculate some data that you don't want them to see? Yeah, so you can, in the query, you can do some calculations, computations, whatever, and then only return a certain piece of that data.
For example, in the code, I need to load the data and see which row this user belongs to, for example, and then send that information over to the.
Okay, so like change what you return from a query based on the user's role?
So there could be more operation related to that. It could be I want to load it up and depend on the role I want to run the call or not.
So it's just basic JavaScript. So whatever you can do is you have full control over it. Like the only magic that we add is very minimal. We just hook up a pipe between your query or mutation return and the use query output on the client. So exactly what you pass through is exactly what you get, and you can open DevTools and inspect that. So you have full control of JavaScript on the server to do any type of checking roles and only returning certain data. Answer is like, yes, you can absolutely do it. It's just, you might need to figure out the best way that works for you.
The only reason I ask is because when I saw on the page, on your example, right, you have this is the load is up front, do a Prisma.fun up front, then the next part is basically return the page. Right? So I was kind of wondering, like where the boundary is. Is the boundary on the DB call, or is the boundary on the return of the React object, the React component?
The return of the query, or was it in the React component?
So, for example, on your page, right, the example you showed, I was just wondering, when you put the DB code, that must be an API code, right? You compare API code to the backend.
Okay, so for example, here, where it calls DB. So this is running on the server. This whole file is running on the server, yeah. So your query and mutation, your entire file is on the server, and then whatever you return from that is what will be sent to the client. Yeah, and so that's where the pipe, we just connect the output of this to the output of use query on the client. And that's all we do is just a very minimal pipe. So I think it's a good level of magic. Yep. Anyone else?
Sorry if I missed it, but does Blitz include a solution for paginating your collection?
Yes, we have. So does Blitz include a solution for paginating? That's set up by default because I always hated adding it in Rails or whatever it was. Let's see. So get projects. So we have a paginate utility that comes from Blitz, and you can pass in your skip take count, and then here's where you just call like db.project.count, db.project.findMany, return next has more count, etc. And then your project index has a use paginated query. And so we have it set up here by default using the query parameter, page equals 1, 2, 3, and go to previous page. You can see router.push query, and so that just all works out of the box. Anyone else? Any of you using Blitz before today? Yeah. Oh. Oh, man. Why'd you do that to me?
My question is, so it feels like you got part of the inspiration from Ruby or Rails, right? How do you do like a one-to-many relationship and things like that?
How do you do one-to-many relationship? It's all on Prisma, yeah. And it's a very, so, okay, let's see. So we can run, actually.
The reason why I'm asking is because in Ruby Rails you do it inside of the Ruby file.
Yeah. So we'll do Blitz generate all, we can say task. Yep, here we go. We'll give a task a name, and we can say a task belongs to a project, and we can pass a parent. So the parent flag determines the routing. We want it to be nested under the project. And so this will generate the pages so that it's /project ID /task ID. And then your just regular mutations, get task, create, task, update. And then the task, the schema in Prisma has a relation that belongs to a project. And then if we need to fix that, but just ignore that part. And so if you do get task, let's do get task. We do we? I thought we, I thought we had some stuff in here that would automatically filter. Okay, yeah. So we just pass in where, and then on the client is where we pass in the where project ID equals the project ID from the route. So in that route, you have the project ID, the task ID, and you can go from there. Yeah.
Okay, so I see that you're using React Query, right? Is there a time that you have seen people using another tool like, I don't know, like Redux, and their state inside of Blitz or not?
Are people using Redux inside of Blitz? I don't think so. React Query handles like the vast majority of the state management that you need, which is just caching server data. And then if you need something else on top, a lot of people are using, there's like Valtio, Zustand, and Jotoi. They're like three different, it's like one's like Redux, one's like Recoil, one's like MobX, but they're all like sort of minimal, really nice things. And so a lot of people use one of those for some more advanced stuff, or XState. I've used XState before for something complex. Yeah. All right, one more question. Awesome, thank you so much.